My name is Hope Becker. I'm the Deputy Zoning Administrator and the Community Development Specialist. That's a mouthful. I see some familiar faces tonight, and I also see some new faces, so that's great. Feedback. Where's that coming from? So tonight we have Joanna McKnight and Summer Louthan from the Department of Historical Resources. You can also hear that as referenced as DHR. And before we get started, I also wanted to make mention that there are a ton of flyers over there, so feel free to get up and pick up any of them. There's some new ones tonight that the ladies will be referencing to, so if you feel like you want to get those before they start speaking, you're more than welcome to. There's also some green cards over there, and basically what we are looking for is future sessions that you might want, or even if it's not until next spring that we start, at least we kind of know and have a reference or frame of mind of what community members are wanting to see for future sessions. Or maybe you just have a question that you don't want to ask tonight, or that you've had on your mind and you don't know how to get a hold of that person. Feel free to fill out one of those cards with your information. I'd be more than happy to get you in touch with those individuals via email or phone call. Go from there. In addition, after tonight, there is going to be one more session on June 5th at 6 p.m. This one is going to be with Tom Wolf. He's our professional videographer in the back. He's putting together a bunch of small clips that I think everybody will find interesting of people that are currently in projects, people that have done past projects before and after, so that you get a real idea as to what some of the projects in our area have either gone through or are currently going through. So there'll just be some small video clips that he'll be putting together, and go from there. We'll also have some people coming in to give just a small testimony of what their experiences are, because they either are going through the tax credit themselves with some of the repairs on their homes, or they have already gone through it. So that'll be our last session for this particular series that we're putting together, but we look forward to possibly doing it again here soon with some additional information, and maybe a repeat, maybe a refresher. So our first speaker tonight is Joanna McKnight, and she's with the Department of Historical Resources.
Thank you.
So please welcome.
Hello. Thank you. I am an architectural historian with the Department of Historic Resources. I manage the Eastern region, the state of Virginia, and we have two other regions, the Northern region and the Western region. We are a pretty small agency with a lot of different divisions, and Summer is here with the tax credit division, and you'll hear her speak next on that topic. So a little bit about DHR. Our mission is to foster, encourage, and support the stewardship of Virginia's significant historic, architectural, archaeological, and cultural resources. And we do that through a range of programs, including the Historic Registers, which you will hear me talk about, and that is the program in which I am the most involved. Archaeology programs, our highway marker program, which you see on the side of the road, the big gray silver markers. State grant programs, rehabilitation tax credits program, community outreach, certified local government, survey and documentation, cemetery preservation, archives, review and compliance, and through preservation easements. So we are busy. A little bit about preservation in Virginia. It is a patriotic way to celebrate your community and its history. We are proud to have one of the oldest state registers in the country, and we have been adding properties to those for over 50 years. We also lead the nation in the honorary state and federal register programs. We have a really high volume of properties that come in every year, and we are really proud of that. It was founded in early 1966. The General Assembly established the Virginia Historic Landmarks Commission, which was one of the first statewide preservation offices in the country. Later that year, U.S. Congress passed the National Historic Preservation Act, and the act created the National Register of Historic Places as the official list of structures, sites, objects, and districts that embody the historical and cultural foundations of the nation. It named the National Park Service in the Department of the Interior to manage the register. To carry out its provisions, the Act authorized the creation of a state historic preservation officer and a state review board in every state and territory, and that is what DHR is, the State Historic Preservation Office. Since 1989, the State Historic Preservation Officer and a professional staff of historians, architectural historians, architects, archaeologists, and policy and admin specialists have comprised the Virginia Department of Historic Resources. The governor appoints the State Historic Preservation Officer, and they in turn appoint our State Review Board. So a little bit more about the register. Both the state and federal are non-restrictive, non-regulatory, and honorary. There are over 3,500 places listed in Virginia's historic lists. Since 1966, we have listed over 500 historic districts, and the list is truly just a list. It is not a local district with a regulative ordinance, no restrictions accompany it. It's not the establishment of a park, not a place that the state or federal government has an active presence. It's an official list of cultural resources significant in American and Virginia history, architecture, engineering, archaeology, and culture. A little bit about the registers. You can do individual properties or historic district listings. It can be a building, a site, an object, or a structure. These places are listed due to architectural, engineering, or archaeological significance, and historic properties that are significant for their association with historic events, trends and patterns of development, and individuals are also listed in the registers. And DHR has made a focused effort to recognize the heritage of communities. Currently, I said 3, but multiple historic districts listed in the register as honorary districts in or near the town of Ashland. Ashland Historic District, Berkeleytown Historic District, Brown Grove Rural Historic District, which is just outside of the town, but in Hanover County, and you have the RMC buildings, which are technically, functionally a district within the town. So a little bit about historic districts. They are not local districts. You do have local districts in certain localities, but we administer the state and federal districts, so no regulations and no restrictions. A state or federal district does not lead to a local district or vice versa. The district has had and will continue to not have effect on property assessment or taxes. Historic district designation at the state or federal level has had and will have little impact on any activity related to roads, bike lanes, infrastructure, or changes like that. DHR will review VDOT and federally funded projects, but we do not stop projects. We typically try and mitigate them to lessen the effects on historic resources. Zoning, historic district at the state and federal level does not impact zoning. That is a local issue. Some benefits to the register. The listing increases public awareness of a community's historic resources and typically encourages preservation. Places no restrictions or obligations on private property owners using private funds. It provides for careful review of negative impacts of federal government funded or permitted projects, and may provide financial incentives such as tax credits or participating in the preservation easement program. So there are a couple of steps we take to evaluating a property for eligibility for listing in the registers. The first step is a completion of a preliminary information form. Second step, once that process is through, you are eligible to go ahead and write the National Register of Historic Places nomination form. And what kinds of properties can be nominated? Typically, property which has achieved significance at least 50 years ago, or if within 50 years is of exceptional importance. A property must meet one of the 4 register criteria, and it must retain physical integrity. And getting a little into the weeds here, we have 4 criteria in which we evaluate significance. Criterion A, it's associated with a historic significant event or a pattern of events. It applies to properties that are directly associated with events that have made a significant contribution to the broad patterns of our history. Typically in association with agriculture, education, industry, and transportation. Those are just a few of the examples and patterns we see under Criterion A. As you can see here, we have a school, a church, or a diner, a big range. Criterion B is one of the most difficult criterion to meet, and that is association with a person significant in our past. The property should be the location of a significant person's active career or contributions to history, whether it's a dwelling, place of business, government building, church, school, research laboratory, farm, artist studio, or any other type of property. This is one example of Hickory Hill School in Chesterfield County, where it was nominated and listed under criterion B for a long-term principal, James P. Spencer, who was also a very important civil rights advocate in the state of Virginia, whose contributions led to nationwide change. And he was there for, I think, over 30 years. So that building, in that situation, that counted for criterion B as well as under criterion A for education. Criterion C, and I think this is the one most people are most familiar with, architecture. Distinctive architecture or engineering, or the work of a master, or possessing high artistic value or distinguishable entity, such as a historic district. And you can see here are two types of pretty high-style buildings in which the register was traditionally known. But it doesn't actually have to be such a high-style example of architecture. It can be, even a log cabin if it maintains its characteristics of construction methods. It's a type of building that was built during a particular period of time. We look at those as well. And then we have criterion D, and that applies to properties that have yielded or could yield important historic or prehistoric information through archaeology. Typically, those are archaeological sites, but a cultural landscape or building might also qualify, but what distinguishes criterion D from the other is the information potential of that site, what questions we can answer by looking into that and by listing that. So in addition to the criteria, we also have to look at integrity. Integrity is the ability of a property to convey its significance. Before you can evaluate the integrity of a property, you have to know why, where, and when, and how a property is significant. Define the essential physical features that must be present for a property to represent its significance, and determine which aspects of integrity are most essential to the property being eligible. So with that, we have guidance from the National Park Service. There are 7 aspects of integrity. Properties must retain the ability to communicate their significance through their location, design, setting, materials, workmanship, feeling, and association. In order to retain integrity, the property must possess several, and most of the time, all of those, or at least a majority of those aspects of integrity. So walking through location, it's the place where where the historic property was constructed or where the historic event occurred. It generally should remain in the same place where it originally was constructed. Like battlefields, it's impossible to move the site, so integrity of location is always maintained. But buildings, bridges, monuments, sculptures, they can all be moved. It's not necessarily easy, but it can be done. And unfortunately, if a resource is moved, it is very hard to get it listed in the registers unless it has that exceptional significance. Design, a combination of elements that create the form, plan, space, structure, and style of a property. Design is a combination of elements such as form, plan, massing, style, and construction method that, when examined as a whole, illustrate how the property was meant to look and function when it was constructed. Materials. Those are the physical elements used at a particular time and in a particular pattern to form a historic property. As you can see here, we have the same building, photograph in 1930 and then the one on the right in 2009. This house was deemed not eligible for the registers due to such a change of materials. You have vinyl siding, replacement windows, a replacement porch of an incompatible style and form, and it was deemed ineligible based on that. So workmanship, similar to design, but it's the physical evidence of a craft of a particular culture or people during a given period in history or prehistory. Integrity of workmanship is connected to the integrity of materials. Workmanship refers to the specific techniques, methods, and crafts of a historic time and people. And as you can see here, this carving is so unique to this one building and this region, and that is retained here. And feeling, the property's expression of the aesthetic or historic sense of a particular place or time. And this aspect is meant to apply to how a historic property captures the aesthetic or historic sense of a particular period of time. And with this example, as you can see, although the exterior of the building is fairly plain and anonymous with its windows boarded over, its doors boarded over, you can't really tell what it is. Its interior still has integrity of feeling. which also makes an important point. Integrity can be present in one part of the property, but not in another. A lack of integrity in one portion does not automatically disqualify it from listing in the registers. And this is one that is a success story. It has been restored. The windows were intact. Everything has been rehabilitated. It is the Julius Rosenwald School in Northumberland County, and it is listed. So one of the, I guess this is the last one, association, the direct link between a historic event or person and the historic property. Association means that the property has a direct link to something significant. It's tangible. An event, a person, an architectural design, a vanished culture. Tenuous associations are not considered to be sufficient to make a property eligible for the registers. And that would be George Washington spent a few nights here. George Washington fought this battle here for a day, something like that. It has to be a really strong link. This example here is, this was the home of the Southern Biscuit Company in Richmond for almost 80 years. The company is locally significant for its association with commerce and manufacturing in the city, and its association with industrial design. Their former headquarters convey its association through its historic signage and equipment, which are both still present today. Just to follow up on that, integrity and condition are not the same thing. You can have incredible integrity, but the building be falling apart. But the materials are still there. It's just not in great shape. By the same token, a property that has been updated and altered over the years may be in really good physical condition, but it'll lack the important integrity if the changes have been unsympathetic to the historic character, particularly in the case of the removal of materials. It is really tough to bring that back. So those are the factors we consider when we are considering listing a property and evaluating it. And the process, just to wrap up, of honorary listing, you would contact our office, one of the regions, whichever region your property is in, to sort of do an informal review of the property. That's where we can look at photos and do a very, very preliminary sort of deep dive into history and try and see if it's remotely eligible based on the criteria as well as the 7 aspects of integrity, and whether it is significant enough to even proceed to the next step. The next step would be completing a preliminary information form, which you would fill out. You complete a little bit about the property's history and significance, why you think it is so important to the community. Send us photos, current photos of the interior, exterior, and site. Send that to us. We will take a few weeks to review it, and at that point we will do a comparative analysis. We'll look at what else is listed in the region. We like to keep it to town or county if possible, and see where everything stands, how many places are listed, if this topic is covered by many other properties. Then once we've reviewed it at the staff level, we'll take it to our evaluation committee, which is comprised of representatives from different divisions within DHR. They will review our presentation and the preliminary information form and say, yes, we agree with you, it's eligible for the registers, or no, we do not agree, this is not eligible. So if you have a property that is found eligible by DHR, we will then take it to our state review board, we will repeat the same presentation and go over why we think it's eligible, and they will either concur or disagree with our recommendation. So if you get to that point and the state review board says, yes, we think this is eligible, we will give you the green light to go ahead and write a nomination. And just to kind of give a precursor, anybody is welcome to submit a nomination form without us saying, yes, this is eligible or not. We just are acting kind of as a proxy of the National Park Service and want to help you be successful in that. And that's why we have the PIF process. But if for some reason it's not found eligible by DHR, you are still welcome to submit a nomination, and we will go through that process with you. It's just, there's a reason we're saying we don't think it's eligible. So typically we're on point with that and on the same bar with NPS. So once you begin writing the nomination, we will go back and forth. Typically, the property owner will try and write a nomination or hire a consultant. And nominations are typically multifaceted and can be a bit difficult to write if you are a non-professional, but we want to encourage that. So we will work with you throughout that process if you are a property owner and are interested in doing it yourself. So we go back and forth with reviewing and editing, DHR staff and the property owner. Once it's at a point where we think it's ready, it will go to our state review board again for their review. They have opportunity to come back with edits, recommendations, or say, hey, this is ready to go, we can vote on it. Once that's ready for a vote, we will present it to the State Review Board and Board of Historic Resources for their votes. Once at that meeting, the Board of Historic Resources votes yes, it is considered listed in the Virginia Landmarks Register. Once the State Review Board votes yes, that is yes, okay, we can send it to the National Park Service for their review. National Park Service then has 45 days to review it, and once it is approved by them, it is listed in the Federal Register. Sometimes they will send it back and say, no, we need to make some edits, and we'll go through the process again of review and editing. So it can be lengthy, but it also can be sort of short. I say 6 months to at least a year for most of them, realistically. So that is sort of a very lengthy overview of the registers, and I was telling Summer, I think every time I give a presentation, most of the questions are really based on tax credits. So I figure most of the questions will be about that, but this is the precursor to becoming eligible for credits. So we have to work through this together to get there. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask or email me. I'll have my cards at the back. If you have questions about a specific property, technical assistance about your building, what kind of roof you should use, what kind of roof material you shouldn't use, that kind of thing, we're all available and able to assist with that as well. But any questions?
Anne just asked, does that mean that a building needs to be on the National Register by itself in order to qualify for tax credits?
I will let Summer get into all. It's very specific process. So
It's a similar process because you have to do the BI.
it is. There's eligibility, federal level of approval, state level, depending on which program you want to do, and whether it's a historic district or an individual property. So a lot of different ways to go about that, but yeah.
All right, so I am Summer Louthan. I'm a architectural historian and a tax credit reviewer with the Department of Historic Resources. And I'm going to talk to you today about the tax credit program. There's a lot of information in this. I'm going to stop a couple times to see if you guys have questions in the middle so that you don't lose those questions going through.
Can you pull the mic a little closer to you?
Yes, sorry.
Thanks.
If I start being too quiet or mumbling, tell me, because my husband says I mumble. So today what we're going to discuss is the general introduction to the tax credit program. I'm going to talk about the application process, then go over an overview of the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation, which are the standards you have to follow when completing a tax credit project, go over common rehabilitation concerns, and then keys to a successful project. So first off, what are historic tax credits? They're a dollar-for-dollar reduction in your income tax liability for property owners who are rehabilitating a historic building. The tax credit is subtracted from the amount owned on either your state or federal income taxes, depending on which program you're utilizing. So there are two tax credit programs. There's a state program and a federal program. The federal program was established in 1977. It's administered by the National Park Service. It's only eligible for income-producing buildings, so homeowner, if you're trying to work on your own house, you won't be eligible for the federal program. It's a 20% credit on eligible expenses. There's a 5-year holding period, which means when you finish and get your project certified, there's a 5-year period where Park Service still has review purview on any work that you do on your property, and that work must meet the standards. If something happens to the property or in that 5-year period you demolish another historic building on your property, there's the potential for the tax credit for the credit to be recaptured. It's a 20-year carry forward of the credit, so it's not captured all in that first year. When your project is certified, you can carry that credit forward and back 1 year. The Virginia program was established in 1997. It's administered by our office, the Department of Historic Resources. It is for income-producing and homeowner properties. and it is a 25% credit on eligible expenses. There is no holding period, so once your project is certified, we don't review any future work on your project, on your property, and it has a 10-year carry forward on the credit, no carry back. So the 3 things that are required for a project to be eligible for the program. First thing, the building has to be certified as a historic building. So it needs to be either individually listed or on the national or national and state registers, a contributing resource in a historic district, or for the state credit only, it can be found eligible for listing, individually eligible for listing, and not be formally listed. But that's only for the state credit. So as your question earlier, it doesn't have to be individually listed to be eligible for the program. If it's a contributing resource within a historic district, then it is eligible for the program. Secondly, your project needs to meet or follow the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation. I'm going to go into a lot more detail on the standards later on in the presentation, but just know that they are regulatory for the program, and so it is required that the project meets the standards. And then last, your project, you need to spend a certain amount of money within a certain period of time. For the state credit, this is pretty easy to figure out how much you need to spend. If it's an income-producing property, you need to spend 50% of the assessed value of the building the year before your project starts. For a homeowner project, you need to spend 25% of the assessed value of the building the year before the project starts. So it's the building, not including the land. Federal program is a little bit more of a moving target. The eligible expenses must be at least $5,000 or 100% of the adjusted basis for your building. The adjusted basis is the purchase price of the building, not including the land, minus any depreciation, which has occurred, plus the value of capital improvements. That value of capital improvements changes each year as you do your project, and so it's kind of a changing number as your project is going on. So it's not as easy to know that the amount you need to spend for a federal project as it is for a state project. Going into a state project, you know right up front, I need to spend this much money for my project to be eligible. So talking about eligible expenses, there are certain things that are eligible for the credit and certain things that aren't eligible for the credit as far as the expenses being tied to it. It has to be capital in nature, so work on the historic building itself. It also includes some soft costs, so architecture and engineering fees. It'll include construction period taxes, interest, reasonable developer fees, and we'll also include, if you hire like a historic consultant to help you with the process, their fees will be covered and your CPA fees for the end of the project. It does not include the acquisition cost for the property. It does not include the cost for any new additions or any expanding of the footprint of the building. So that also includes, we've had projects where people dig out a crawl space to make a usable basement space underneath. That is considered expanding the footprint. That cost associated with it wouldn't be a contributing cost, an eligible cost to the program. Landscaping generally isn't, unless, say, you have a tree that's growing into the foundation. That's kind of more tied to the preservation of the building, and that would be eligible cost. And then appliances like refrigerators, stoves wouldn't be eligible costs as well because they can technically be taken out of the building. So I said you have to spend a certain amount of money. There's also a certain period of time. This does not mean that you have like 2 years to finish a project and you have to get it done within that time period. What it means is that you have to spend that certain amount of money, that 25% or that 50% within a 24-month period that ends in the year that your project is certified. So that bulk of money needs to be spent within that time period, but you may be spending way more money than that amount of money. You just need to make sure that you're not front-loading your project and then taking a long time to finish it after that, and spending the bulk of your expenses at the beginning of the project. I often tell homeowners that it's really good to, you can do the option of phasing your project, and that extends that 24-month period to 60 months. So some homeowners tend to do like a little bit at a time. They do this thing, then they wait a year, and then funding comes through to them, and then they can work on something else. that helps kind of cover that period of time. But if you've got a project, you've got a design coming in, someone's gonna come in and contractors are gonna get all that work done in a 24-month period, it's gonna probably be fine for you. Do you have any questions just on that general eligibility of the projects before I jump into the application process? Okay.
Oh, you said front loading. I didn't understand that.
Well, essentially, say you spend the bulk of your expenses on your project in the first year, and then you take 3 more years to finish the project, but you're just kind of doing little bits of stuff, then you might not meet that cost threshold that you need to in that last 24-month period. Because the 25% of your homeowner project needs to be spent in that last 24-month period if you're not phasing your project. And so if you only spend if you have a $100,000 project, you need to spend $25,000 to be eligible for the program. That $25,000 needs to be spent in the last 24 months of your project. But if you have a longer project or a bigger project, then you may be fine. You're just needing to make sure that you meet that cost threshold in that last period of last 2 years. If you can't, if your project's going to be longer, but not spend a big amount more, then I would suggest phasing the project to that 60-month period, and it'll help cover you there.
So is there, if you go 60 months, and you don't do, can you front load a 60 month?
You would essentially need to spend that 25, if yours a $100,000 project, $25,000 you need to spend in 60 months.
Okay.
Yeah,
Over
that whole 60-month period, yeah. Yeah.
I don't know if our house is actually registered on it, but we do know that the Historical Society in our county has it in their books.
Mm-hmm.
And we are in a historic, I don't know if it's like official, a district.
Mm-hmm.
We're in a little district called Sunnysides, I don't know.
My recommendation, and I'll have his contact information, it's on the flyers over there too, but to contact Chris Novelli, who is our kind of first point of contact for our program, and he'll look up and find out whether or not your property is eligible yet,
Okay.
or is listed in a district or anything like that. So that would be the first place. If it's not, then he might send you to her. And she can walk you through what the process is if you want to get it listed.
Okay.
So the application is a 3-part application process. It kind of lines up with those 3 things you need to meet to be eligible for the program. Part 1 application is certifying that your project is a certified historic structure and eligible for the program. The application you'll submit, it'll have an area that writes it up on describes the condition of the building now, the statement certificates for the property. You'll provide photos, a map of it, where it's located within the historic district. This is another one. Chris usually reviews all of the Part 1 applications, so he would be the person that, if you're working through the process of completing a Part 1, that you would contact, and he can help you through that process. He can help you get historic district maps made. So the second part of the application is by far the most complicated part of the application. It's going to be the part of the application that takes the most time. And this is the description of rehabilitation work. This is where you're going to actually outline everything you're going to do to the building. It is, as you can kind of see on the application here, on the right is going kind of feature by feature there. So we have roof, we're describing the existing condition of it, and then what the work is that's proposed for the roof. As much detail as possible in the written application is important. We are approving the work that's in the written application. So you may submit architectural drawings and plans as well, but if the work that's on the plans isn't included in the application, we are not necessarily approving it. We're approving what's written in the application. Along with the written application, you'll also be submitting Photos, you'll submit photos with the Part 1 application, but it doesn't need to be super thorough. For the Part 1 application, every elevation of the building and a couple interior photos is generally enough for the Part 1. The Part 2, we're going to need a little bit more detailed photos. Remember, me as a reviewer, I've never been in your building. I need photos to walk me through your building so I can understand what the condition of your property. They need to be clear photos, well lit. They should be a minimum size of 4x6. We can either take, for the state program, we can either take printed off just photos, like go get photos printed off. They need to be labeled on the back with the photo number, what the picture's taken of. Or we can do the photos like this, 2 per page on a PDF. We can accept either. I would say preference probably for the reviewers is this. It's easier to keep things together and to find things than it is when loose photos start going all over the place, especially if we have a lot of photos that are submitted. If you're applying for the federal credit as well, if you're submitting more than 20 photos, you're going to need to submit it like this because they won't accept the JPEGs like that. More than 20 JPEGs. Things to make sure and take pictures of, the site and surroundings of the property, all exterior elevations, any exterior details like windows, the porches, siding, any outbuildings that might be associated with the property we should have photos of. All interior spaces, really making sure that we have not just detailed photos of areas where damage is or things that need to be fixed, but that we have also photos of entire rooms. Sometimes I'll get an application that comes in where it's just a bunch of photos of really close up, like bad flooring or peeling paint, and like I don't know where this is in the building. I need to know like what am I looking at? I need a full photos. We can take those photos too, but I need photos that I can actually be like I'm standing in the room and seeing what's there. Making sure we want photos of both spaces where work's going to happen and space where work isn't going to happen as well. Rooms where work may not happen, 1 photo is probably sufficient. And for homeowner, like a single family home, 24 to 36 photos is usually enough to cover the property, but more photos is always better. We do not have a limit on the number of photos. I think some states actually cap the number of photos, but we do not cap the number of photos. If you need more photos to show what's going on in your property, send them. And then the photos would be keyed to a floor plan so that we know where the photos were taken. So they're numbered, the photos will have a number on them, and then they're placed pointing in the direction that the photo was taken. And again, this just helps me as a reviewer in my office who's not in the building know where I am on the building and understand the property better. And then along with the photos and the application, we would need drawings. Depending on how complicated your project is, depends on how detailed these drawings need to be. For smaller, less complicated project, hand drawings might be sufficient as long as they provide enough detail showing where doors are, where windows are. We ask that if there are going to be changes, walls moved, doors moved, things like that, that we have existing condition drawings and proposed drawings so that we can easily be able to evaluate kind of the current condition and what's proposed. So a couple ways that we might respond to your Part 2 application. We'll either approve all the work, it looks great, we have no problems, move forward. We might approve your project with conditions, which is essentially saying, we're okay with this as long as you do X, Y, and Z, or we're okay with this as long as you provide us, like if you want to replace your windows, we might say, we need additional photos showing the damage, or we need, if we're approving them, we need existing drawings and proposed drawings to ensure that the new windows are going to match the historic windows. We might place your project on hold, so if we didn't get enough photos or enough detail in your application, we may place your project on hold and say, we need this additional information before we can actually review your project. Or a project will be denied. Very, very rarely is a project denied at the Part 2 phase because, I mean, you have to have a really bad plan at that point for it not to be. We might put it on hold and say, these are some changes we think need to happen. to bring the project in compliance with the standards, but it's not. I think I've had one project, and it's because the work was all underway, and I knew that none of it met the standards, and they couldn't fix it. So we understand that projects change, especially when you're working with a historic building. You open a wall and you find something you weren't expecting. That's what we have the amendment forms for. These are going to be used for, one, if we ask you for additional information, this is what you'll submit the additional information with. If you are updating your previously proposed scope of work, so you've found something that additional that needs to be fixed. If you've decided, oh, this is going to cost us more, we're not going to do this portion of the project anymore, that would be submitted to us by amendment. And then you would inform us of change of ownership or address or anything like that would be submitted by amendment. That's highly recommended to make sure if there's changes in your project scope to submit it to our office. If you're not sure if it's something that needs to be submitted, reach out to your reviewer. We're there to help you guys through the process. Do not feel scared to call or email us. It may be something where we can just say, sounds good, don't worry about submitting an amendment, I'm not worried about this, or yeah, let's submit this as an amendment so we can have formal response in the file. Sometimes it can be annoying to have to do that, but I have reviewed projects at the end of a project where a previous reviewer who wasn't with the program wasn't there anymore, and he had a lot of just informal, yeah, that's okay. And then I was reviewing part 3, and I didn't see anything in the file that said, we said it was okay for this to happen. And the applicant's like, well, so-and-so said I could do this. It's really on everyone's benefit to have like a formal recognition of being okay with something. I try to print emails to files too, so that at least there's those records as well. And the last part of the application process is the Part 3 application. This is actually going to be certifying that your work meets the standards, followed everything that you said you were going to do. This is when we're gonna get documentation showing what work, the costs that are associated with the project, and what is qualified costs. The Part 3 application for the state program has to be submitted within a year of the project being completed. If it comes in after that year, the project's no longer eligible for the program. You would submit the Part 3 application, photos showing the completed rehabilitated work. You would have to complete an audit or a agreed upon procedures report, which I'll talk about in a second, and a Part 3 review fee and billing statement that would come in. There's always the potential that we might review the work and something had changed that we didn't get a chance to review, where we might put your project on hold and request something to be remediated before we approve the project. So that is always a potential, but if you've been in constant contact with your reviewer, hopefully that shouldn't be something that happens. And again, photos will be similar to the photos that are submitted with the Part 2 application. We ask as much as possible for photos to be taken from the same place and in the same order as the Part 2 application. It makes it a lot easier for us as reviewers to review it, which means you review your project quicker, which means you get your credits faster. So you can see here their photos, easily compare. I can go through and see what work was done, what the condition was beforehand, and really quickly review the project. And then, as I stated, the request for completed work also needs to have that cost certification. It's breaking down what are the eligible and ineligible expenses for the project. This is what we're going to base off what your actual credit allocation is. You're going to need to do either agreed upon procedures report or an audit, and this is going to be dependent on how much you spend. Less than $500,000 is going to be a AUP, an agreed upon procedures report. More than $500,000 is an audit. Really make sure to keep all your records to give to your CPA so that you can get credit for all of that work. Make sure if you're doing an addition on a property, that addition costs aren't qualified costs. It's good to work with your contractor at the beginning to make sure they're aware that when they're giving you their billing statements and everything, that they can split it out, because you may be doing updated electrical in the whole house, but the electrical that's going into the addition wouldn't be considered eligible. And so if you have your contractor aware of that at the beginning, they can already be divvying out that cost allocation, and it makes it a lot easier than having to go back at the end. And if it's not able to get pulled out, it may be something that you just aren't able to claim. And an important notice for anybody that would be thinking about doing a federal project. The Park Service now only accepts electronic applications. They don't take hard copy applications anymore. So hard copy would still come into our office. At that point, Chris would submit or send a link to a SharePoint site that you would upload the exact copy of what you send in hard copy to us. It would sit there kind of housed until we complete our review and send our recommendation to the Park Service, and then it would all get sent up to their site. If you are going to do a federal program, I highly recommend looking at the Park Service's website because they are very particular about their naming conventions and how photos can be submitted, and if they're not like that, they won't accept it. If there's little minor changes, things that are wrong in how you name them, we'll fix them, but if it comes in not named at all right, then we usually will send back and say, hey, can you get on here and fix this? And it just will delay the review of your project. And just deadlines to be aware of. For the federal program, a Part 1 application needs to be submitted before the project is completed. If the project is completed and you learn about the program and want to submit for the federal program, you won't be eligible for it because IRS regulations say that it has to be a certified historic structure to be eligible for the program, and it has to be a certified historic structure at the completion of the project. And the only way that happens is by submitting the Part 1. For the state program, Part 1, 2, and 3 need to be submitted before within a year of the project being completed, but it is highly recommended to submit the Part 1 and Part 2 before even starting your work. If you've started work and then you submit something to us, one, you may not have before photos that make it hard for us to understand the before condition of the property, but also we may have issues with some of the work that's proposed, and if you've already done it, you may have to undo it to still be eligible for the program, and that just costs you more money. And so we'd like to avoid that as much as possible. So any questions on the application process before I talk about the standards? I will say if you're applying for the federal program and the state program, it comes in on the federal application forms. We just use the federal form for the state program at that point. Yes?
Would an income producing farm qualify for the federal?
It does. It's a little wonky and I'd have to look back on it.
Did you state that for the video?
Yeah.
Did you state it what?
So he said, would an income producing farm be eligible for? And I think it kind of depends. But it's impossible, yes. And I don't know if it depends on, like, the house doesn't, but the barns do or something like that. I can't quite remember. So, as I stated, one of the things that the project has to do is it has to follow the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation. There are 4 standards, Secretary of the Interior standards. There's preservation, rehabilitation, restoration, and reconstruction. We use the preservation standard for the tax credit program. And the preservation standard, or the rehabilitation standard for the program, it is the most flexible standards for putting in new uses within buildings. It acknowledges the need for historic buildings to change to meet new needs while also retaining those historic elements that are important to the property. For the tax credit program, it applies to all building types, sizes, materials, exterior and interior of the building, and extend to the building site and environment and new construction. So I'm going to go through each of the standards so you kind of know what they are. Standard 1, it says a property shall be used for its historic purpose or be placed in a new use that requires a minimal change to the defining characteristics of the building and its site and environment. So this larger picture here was a recent tax credit project I had at Scott's Addition. It was a car showroom and rear garage space. So a new office space went into it, so a completely different use. But it's retains those character defining features, that open space, the historic, everything is still, nothing's covered within it. So it was a good new use for that space. Standard 2 says that a historic character of a property shall be retained and preserved. The removal of historic materials or alteration of features and spaces that characterize a property shall be avoided. So looking at this, obviously the building on the left doesn't meet that standard. They have removed all of those historic materials. The windows have changed, the siding has changed, all the decorative elements have been removed. That would be a project, that was a tax credit project that would not get approved. Standard 3, each property shall be recognized as a physical record of its time, place, and use. Changes that create a false sense of historical development, such as adding conjectural features or architectural elements from other buildings, shall not be undertaken. So here, kind of similar to the last picture, but we have a nice Second Empire building on the right that still has all of its historic elements. On the left, they've removed those and tried to put a bunch of colonial revival pieces here that are not appropriate for this building. Standard 4 says that most properties change over time, and those changes that required historic significance in their own right shall be retained and preserved. We get a lot of this in commercial districts with storefronts. They may have had historically or originally had cast iron storefronts. Later on, to try and modernize those commercial spaces, they came in and put new, more modern storefronts on them. That may have helped happen within the period of significance for the district, and that tells the story of that evolution of that historic district as it's changed and tried to evolve with the times. If an applicant came in and said, I've got a historic photo of what this storefront looked like, you know, in 1910, we want to go back to that, we would say, this storefront is part of the history of this building now too, and it has acquired its own significance and it should be retained. We would not approve removing it and trying to go back to match something that was there earlier. Standard 5 says distinctive features, finishes, and construction techniques or examples of craftsmanship that characterize a property shall be preserved. So again, those really important character-defining pieces within a property, needing to make sure that we're preserving those, they're not covering them up, and we're repairing them. Standard 6 is the longest one. Deteriorated historic features shall be repaired rather than replaced. Where the severity of deterioration requires replacement of a distinctive feature, the new feature shall match the old in design, color, texture, other visual qualities, and where possible, materials. Replacement of missing features shall be substantiated by documentary, physical, or pictorial evidence. First and foremost, we're going to say repair a feature. If you got in here, you've got siding on this building, instead of going in and just ripping all the siding off and putting new siding on, they're selectively going in and replacing the damaged boards. Steel window here, they've removed the glazing, they're repairing the steel to reinstall new glazing instead of ripping the windows out and putting all new windows in.
What about the interior, where you have crumbling horsehair plaster?
So plaster usually, we can. So usually what we do say is preserve as much of the plaster as you can. Understand that some plaster is beyond preserving, and sheetrock, we don't require to go back with plaster in those instances. And this just kind of covers that historic documentation to replace a missing feature. They had a historic photo that showed what that porch looked like, so they were able to replicate that porch. Standard 7 is dealing with kind of cleaning properties and making sure not to damage materials. So it says chemical or physical treatments such as sandblasting that cause damage to historic materials shall not be used. The surface cleaning of structures, if appropriate, shall be undertaken using the gentlest mean possible. So here's 2 examples of where the gentlest means was not used and has caused damage to the historic material. These are things that can't be fixed and may lead to denial of a project. Standard 8 deals with archaeology. If there's any archaeological sites on your property, it's making sure that those sites are protected and preserved through the project. If they need to be affected, then there's mitigation that's done. Standard 9 deals with new additions and new construction. It says the new construction should not destroy historic materials that characterize the property. The new work shall be differentiated from the old and shall be compatible with the massing, size, scale, and architectural features to protect the historic integrity of the property and its environment. This is where people will say it needs to be contemporary and compatible. A lot of times this is one that people have a hard time with. They either go contemporary or compatible, and it needs to be a mixture of the two. The photo on the right, the building here with the brick addition on the rear, is a good example of an addition that is contemporary and compatible. It's clearly modern. It's not replicating the historic form of the historic building, but it's using similar materials, similar kind of treatments, so it doesn't stand out or clash with that historic building. On the left, obviously contemporary, but not compatible with the historic building. And then standard 10 also deals with new additions, and this is essentially saying that if in the future that addition or new construction is removed, the essential form and integrity of the historic property and its environment would be unimpaired. So it's making sure that additions are added to historic property in a way that if you remove that addition, that historic, if you put an addition on the rear of your building, that if you remove that addition, you haven't lost the whole rear of your building at that point. So again, this one, the one on the left is actually attached. You can't see it there, but it steps in. There's a hyphen that's smaller, and the access point between the buildings are where windows were that they've just extended to make doors. If you remove that addition, you could kind of put that building back to what it was historically. Building on the right, that was shown in the other slide as well, they've just chopped off the back end of the building and put an addition. If you remove that historic building's not there. So I'm just going to go over a couple common rehab concerns that we're looking at when we're looking at projects. We want to avoid changes to primary elevations of buildings. We're much more flexible on changes and additions and things going on the rear of the building, but the primary elevation, we want to see minimal changes happening on the primary there. Windows, we really want to look at retaining historic windows as much as possible. If they're being replaced in kind with matching windows. This brick building here at the bottom, they've just infilled it and stuck a little tiny window in there, not appropriate. And then making sure to preserve those character-defining historic materials on the exterior of the building, that historic wood siding, the decorative trim on the porches. Treatments of masonry can be a really common rehab concern, and poor masonry work can be cause for project denial, pretty straight cause for project denial on them. Here, obviously, very poor repointing work at the top of this building. On the right, there's a building that had pretty hard skin brick on the primary elevation there. They power washed it with a really, really high PSI. It's removed that outer fire skin of that brick. That brick got oversaturated and in that process, and now that's salts that are coming out of the brick that you're seeing on the face of the brick. It also, in the process of that high power washing, chipped a lot of pieces of the brick, so then when they repointed, you're seeing all those areas where that brick has been chipped off. Again, this is something that can't be fixed. This brick has been damaged. It cannot be repaired at this point. And then another photo showing how bad repointing work had really altered the look of a building. This is the same building on the left before the project, on the right after the project. On the left, its historic condition was the brick really red prominent. You barely read the mortar at all. They repointed it with a lighter mortar, very thick mortar joints, and unfortunately Portland cement, which is going to lead to some long-term damage of this building, and this led to a denial of a project. As stated, talking to overpower the historic structure, we want to look at what materials are being used for that new construction and making sure that it's compatible with the historic property. This one on the left here is a good example of a rear addition that was put on that is compatible with the building. It's smaller than the historic building. It's on the rear elevation. It's using a different material, but it blends in. It's an appropriate material for the type of building that this is. I think the only thing I would say is that their windows match the historic windows. I would probably have asked for the windows to not match. But otherwise, it's a very good addition on this building. Last exterior concern is placement of mechanical units. This usually is more of a concern for commercial buildings that are going to put units on the rooftop of their building. We want to make sure those units aren't visible from the public right away. Same with if they put on solar panels, making sure those aren't highly visible. And if you're gonna put units in your yard, just making sure they're sited in a way and screened to reduce their visibility. And then moving into the interior, looking at floor plan changes. We look at buildings as kind of primary and secondary spaces. And our comfort level with changes depends on which that space is. So primary spaces, we're gonna wanna see the least amount of change in the plan in a primary space of the building, where secondary spaces can have a lot more flexibility. So in a house, a primary space might be the stair hall, the front parlor, the dining room, maybe the second floor corridor off the stair hall, the second floor. But kitchens, bathrooms, bedrooms have a lot more flexibility on the work that's proposed within those spaces. We've proposed bathrooms going into bedrooms, things like that. So really kind of understanding the building that you have and what those spaces are will be helpful in your planning of your project and understanding whether it's going to be something that we would approve. And then preserving those important interior features, those distinctive features within your building. Your stair railings, if you're missing railings or banisters, then replicating those instead of have people just come in and stick like square ones. That's not an appropriate match. Tin ceiling here, we've got a historic tin ceiling in this commercial space. We want to see the holes patched and that ceiling preserved. And then on the interior, another concern is where systems are being placed. Making sure that we're not running systems down corridors, they're in secondary spaces. If it's a finished space like in a house, we wouldn't want to see exposed ducts like this, they would go in soffits. Exposed ducts are going to be more appropriate in like an industrial space or a commercial space where you have a decorative tin ceiling like in this right photo. And then lastly, just keys to a successful project. Making sure to contact our office early in your planning process. Even if you haven't submitted a Part 1 application, you can contact and talk to Chris. He'll walk you through the Part 1 process. If you have treatment questions that you're kind of wanting to run through, he'll put you in contact with myself or one of the other reviewers, and we can kind of help with general questions there. Making sure to submit a complete application before work begins is really important. Again, making sure that you got our review response before you start, just so that you're not maybe expending money. You're kind of doing that at your own risk is essentially what we say. If you start your work before getting approval. Respond to any questions that we ask fully. So if there's additional information we need, photos that we need, making sure to get that into us. Submitting good, clear photos before work begins. Again, if you submit a Part 1, 2, and 3 all at once and don't have any photos of the project before the work begins, we won't be able to approve that project because we don't know what the condition was and we don't know what changes. You might say, oh, the flooring was really bad, we had to rip it all out, but we need proof to approve ripping out all that historic flooring. If we don't have that, then we won't be able to approve it. Make sure that your narrative description gives a full scope of work, so we're not having to put it on hold and ask for more information. Make sure to have a clear understanding, again, of those character-defining features of your building, the primary and secondary spaces of your building, and understanding of the standards. Follow through with the work that's been approved, and submit amendments if changes come up. And then make sure you're an informed owner. Sometimes contractors make decisions in the field that owners aren't always aware of that might go against what we've conditioned. We oftentimes, if new walls are going to get built within a building, we say that the trim needs to be differentiated from the historic trim. So it doesn't have to be significantly different, but maybe slightly smaller trim or something like that, where a contractor might be like, well, this looks silly, and match all the trim. At the end of the project, we see it, and we're going to make that come out and put the other trim back in. So just making sure you know what's happening in your building is very helpful for you in the long run. And then staying in contact with us. We're there, we're available for meetings. I hold lots of virtual meetings throughout the week. We can do in-person meetings as well, but I find people like the virtual meetings because they don't have to come all the way to Richmond, especially for our projects far out west. And then just resources. If you go to our website, we have a lot of guidance documents that are recently updated. A number of them are printed off back there. But we have more on our website as well. This is where you'll find our state application. And then the federal website, the National Park Service website, the Technical Preservation Services, is who manages the Park Service program. They have a lot of really great guidance documents there. They have guidance documents on the standards. The bottom one, the preservation topics by index, is a really great one because you can go by different materials or features, find that, and then they'll have a bunch of different documents that they produced in the past that give guidance on those treatments for those materials. So I use that a lot when I'm looking at what appropriate treatments might be. And then the section with the house with the red door is where you would click to go to where all their applications are. And then again, a couple of the links here, and then this is Chris Novelli's contact information. If you pick up any of those sheets over there, I think they will have his contact information on them. He'll be kind of the first point of contact if you're interested in the program with our office to talk to. And then if you have any treatment questions, he'll forward on to you. As I stated, he usually reviews the Part 1 applications and then assigns a reviewer at that point. So you'll get a letter that says your project is a certified historic property. This is your reviewer moving forwards, then you know who your reviewer is and you can contact them, we can set up initial meetings to talk about your project before you submit your Part 2. That is always an option, and again, we're here to ask and answer questions and really help you have successful projects. So any other questions? Yes.
If you're interested in purchasing a property with doing a project like this in mind, can you go through the application process prior to owning a property?
So there's a checkbox on the, sorry, if you are interested in purchasing a property and you're going through this process, can you start the process before you've actually purchased the property? You can, but you need to have a letter from the property owner that says, I'm aware that this person is submitting this application and that we're in the process of purchasing the property. The owner still needs to submit a letter saying, we're okay with the application being submitted. But yes, oftentimes the people are in the process of going through that purchasing process, but they want to get the application moving so that once they've got the building purchased, they can kind of hit the ground running and they're not sitting on that property so long. Other questions? I saw there was a hand.
I was just gonna make a comment.
Yeah.
When we put in our new kitchen and did some other work using tax credits, well, first of all, I want to say a lot of people look at all that paperwork and it turns them off.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not that hard. I mean, we did it without any extra help, except that the DHR folks wanted to make it a success, so they helped us along. So it's really worth doing. So don't get afraid of the paperwork. I've had contractors turn down projects. I've heard of contractors that turn down a project because they said, oh, it's too much paperwork. And it's like, it's not your paperwork.
Yeah.
But
I mean, yeah,
I just wanted
we're
to say
there.
that.
And I have, especially for homeowner projects, have had people where I work with them, have initial meetings with them before they submit a Part 2, where I'll say, email me your draft. I'll look at it and make sure that I'm not going to review your work, but I'm reviewing whether or not you're providing me the information I need, so that it doesn't get put on hold when it comes into my office. And I'm completely willing to do that for applicants to make sure I can look in there and be like, oh, I think we're going to need a little more detail here, or so that once it does come in, it's kind of ready to go.
So I have another materials question.
Yeah.
So we moved in our house like 41 years ago, and the floor was, once we took the old carpet out, it was pine floor with no subfloor, and needed repaired, and we put in a new oak floor on top of that. Is that something that would be okay, or, I mean, you need more than the subfloor?
So we look at, each project is different, and so it would be dependent on, I'd have to look at what the condition was, and it may be something that would be okay, or maybe saying, let's go in with another flooring there, but it's going in with maybe a matching pine floor or something like that. So it is, it's hard to say with each project. Every building we're looking at, they're gonna have a unique circumstance where it might be approvable in one project and not approvable in another project. We've definitely done it in like warehouse buildings where it's just a subfloor, and there's just gaps between the flooring.
Yeah, that
We're new, and they're putting apartments in, so they need fire rating between the floors. And so, there's flexibility within the program, working within each building. And so that's, again, another place where it would be talking early and saying, these are the conditions we're working with, and that's where a really detailed application comes in handy too. Because if you just said, we're gonna cover all flooring with this new flooring, but we didn't know the reasoning why, then we might say no. But if we have a good explanation of why that's happening, we might have a lot more flexibility in those cases.
Now that I bring the microphone.
But yeah, reach out to our office if you guys are interested in the program. The more the merrier.
I do have.
Yeah.
What about with all the stuff with Doge? How is that affecting?
It will not affect the state program right now. The state program is an independent program.
Okay.
I literally cannot say with the federal program. Right now, I don't know that, like, it's not going away. There are acts right now that are trying to get pushed through to make the program easier to use. I think what may affect it the most is whether or not they get a reduction in staff to manage the program. That makes the time frames longer for doing the review. My hope is that it is a program that produces it. It's one of the programs that the Park Service does that actually funds itself because they charge review fees. It's a program that funds itself somewhat because they charge review fees, similar to our office. Our program is fairly self-sufficient because of that. And there's a lot of big developers that use the program that might get really upset if it goes away, including the president has used it. So, but I have absolutely no idea. I think it's like anything. We could wake up tomorrow and it's, I don't know. So.
No more questions? Going once, going twice? Done, you lost your chance. So, well, I want to thank you guys so much for coming. A reminder that June 5th will be our last session at 6 p.m. right here. And if you do have questions, I saw that Joanna has some of her cards on the table, and I'm sure it'd be very easy to reach somewhere if you needed to. Or if there's anybody else that are past speakers that you wanted to get in touch with, just reach out to me and I'll be sure to get you in touch with them. So otherwise, I hope you guys all have a great evening and thanks for coming out.